By the way, this is a number that drives me crazy about the Republican Party. In January, CBS News reported, at the peak of Obamaism, when business was at its lowest point of respect, that when asked the question, which do you think is a better way of creating jobs? Cutting business taxes, using the term business, cutting business taxes, or increasing government spending. It was 59-21. I mean, the fact that the Republicans in the House and Senate did not create a business tax cut of $787 billion and said, look, if you're determined to spend $787 billion, we have a model. That would have put you at a reasonably high number of people with an interest in it. We tested recently with Dave Winston, and by the way, it's now 62-21. And nobody believes, I mean, the country increasingly believes the stimulus is a waste of money and just politician payoff. So at American Solutions, we're developing, because we're going to have a big fight over the economy starting in January. They're going to try to ram through another stimulus because they don't know anything else. I mean, these are people of stunningly limited capacity. They get up every morning, they know the answer is government, they just don't know what the question is yet. So we're going to have a three-part economic plan at American Solutions. Part one, commit to balancing the budget by cutting spending and by reforming the government. And when you start out at $4 trillion, there is a lot of stuff you can cut, and nobody who works for a living will have noticed it. So I think you start with that, and you say we're going to downsize government. We're going to pretend government's like all the businesses that have been downsizing. We're going to learn how to do it at the same level of intensity. And we did it once before with John Kasich and Bob Livingston and Bill Archer and Dick Armey. We balanced the federal budget. 4 straight years, $405 billion in debt paid off while cutting taxes for the first time in 16 years. We know this can be done. It's a historic fact. It's not a theory. Part two, a very aggressive pro-jobs and pro-business tax program. 5 simple steps. 1, 50% reduction in Social Security and Medicare tax for the next 2 years for both the employer and the employee, so every small business gets a massive windfall for liquidity without worrying about the government-run banks, and so that every working American knows that we're going to bring them an increase in take-home pay immediately. You pay for that, frankly, by taking money out of the stimulus, taking money out of TARP, selling everything you've got at General Motors, AIG, all the banks, get the government out of owning stock, and go back and you put that in to replace the money you just took out of the Social Security and Medicare Trust Fund. That gives you a 2-year window, by the way, to then talk about serious entitlement reform, because people will now be faced with a substantial increase in their taxes if they don't reform the entitlements or a new model of the entitlements. And you'll have suddenly have the richest debate about entitlement reform in American history. Second, 100% expensing for small businesses, so that they can buy the best equipment in the world, write it off in 1 year, and American workers can be the most. And I'd probably define small businesses at around $1 billion gross sales. 3, you want to match the Chinese. This is the debate we want to have. You want to match the Chinese in job creation? Let's match the Chinese capital gains tax rate. It's 0. Okay? Now, I'm ready to go everywhere in the country and debate every liberal in the country and say, hey guys, I want to match the Chinese in job creation. You want them to buy your debt. The American people ought to get to choose. You want to be with the team that wants the Chinese to own your debt, or you want to be the team that wants you to have a job beating the Chinese? And again, I'm not hostile to the Chinese. They're our competitors. You know, it's okay for us to decide we would like to win economically. I know if you're a liberal, the term win is very difficult. The term we is almost impossible. But for the other 98% of the country that goes, are you nuts? So 0 capital gains. You want American companies to compete in the world market? This is something Craig Barrett at Intel told me 2 years ago. Match the Irish corporate tax rate, 12.5%. We have the highest combined state and federal corporate tax in the world, and then we wonder why we don't do better. And then we fuss around with liberals who are mad because corporations act rationally because they flee all the bad things liberals do to them. And then we don't want to defend the corporation because they sent the job overseas, and we're not smart enough to attack the liberal for forcing them to send the job overseas. Well, I'm prepared to say, hey, I want every American company to win everywhere on the planet because that means more jobs in the U.S. Let's have a 12.5% Irish level of corporate tax rate. Finally, And again, this is an issue Republicans ought to use every single morning for the rest of their lives, because it is a 79% issue. I'm a Reaganite. Reagan was an FDR Democrat. Find 75 or 80% issues. Stand next to them and smile. Let your opponent frown. Now, what am I describing? The permanent abolishment of the death tax. The fact is, overwhelmingly, you know, rich people feel guilt-ridden, and they think they shouldn't be too publicly aggressively for the death tax. Warren Buffett's so totally against it, he actually gave away billions of dollars tax-free so he wouldn't have to pay taxes on them, because he would really like to have a big tax as long as he didn't pay it. Well, that's nonsense. The average American knows it is fundamentally wrong to require you to visit the IRS and the Undertaker the same week. It's that simple. And the average American believes, back to the pursuit of happiness, that if you spend your life working and saving and doing the right thing, no government should come in when you die and take it away from your family. That it's fundamentally, morally wrong. Finally, what threatens us, and what do we need to do to be safe? Two things threaten us. One is the eventual potential of a Chinese hegemonic system, and frankly, the answer to that is us, not anybody else. There's nothing the Chinese are going to do in the next 40 years that we couldn't radically overmatch if we'd get our act together. If we go back to being an entrepreneurial, investing, working society, if we go back to being a country that actually requires you to learn before you get a diploma, if we go back to being a country that doesn't pay schools that don't teach, if we go back to being a country that decides trial lawyers are less useful than engineers, scientists, and doctors, nobody's going to catch us in the lifetime of anybody in this room, not even the lifetime of Griffin. The fact is, we're the best integrator of human talent on the planet unless we're methodically screwing ourselves up. That's called government, by the way. So if we do our job right, the Chinese aren't a problem. The only problem that is direct and a mortal threat, which the Ron Silver film alluded to, is the fact that we can't even describe the irreconcilable wing of Islam. Now, I want to say just two things on this topic, because I don't want to run much longer, but it's really important to understand. They're very simple things. George Orwell wrote in The Politics of the English Language that if you can't describe something accurately, you can't think about it. And you can always tell when you have a bad policy because it's impossible to use language clearly to explain it. The Poles, Clifton and I are working with Dave, are developing a great new movie on John Paul II's 9-day visit to Poland in 1979, which in many ways was the beginning of the end of the Soviet Empire. And the Poles, in the following 10-year struggle with the Soviet dictatorship, developed the slogan, 2 + 2 = 4. I know it's bold, it's out at the edge. Partly comes from George Orwell's 1984, where the state torturer says to the innocent citizen, if we tell you the answer is 5, it's 5. If we tell you the answer is 3, it's 3. And the person being tortured is thinking, yeah, but what if it's actually 4? But it also comes from Camus' The Plague, in which Camus writes, there are times when a man will be killed for saying 2 + 2 = 4, because the authorities can't stand the truth.